Hello there, Hollow. So then, in this video, I'm going to be talking about how a Dark Souls Trilogy Remake would theoretically work if this actually happened. Now, this is in response to a comment by a channel member, Just Another Dog, who I felt like he wrote a really long comment talking about how a Dark Souls Trilogy would actually work, and made me kind of want to respond to this comment in a way that sort of ended up bouncing off into what I think would make for an interesting video. So, Just Another Dog says, I felt that from a monetary standpoint, the truly best thing that FromSoftware can do right now, whilst they gather their thoughts and staff on a Dark Souls 4 or a Bloodborne 2 or Elden Ring successor, is this: a Dark Souls Trilogy. A complete remake of all three Dark Souls games with their DLCs in one game world, running in an improved DS3 game engine and game mechanics to fix the clunky Dark Souls 2 dead zones and whatnot. The catch is, you start the game at Dark Souls 1 and progress all the way through in one playthrough to Dark Souls 3's ending. Everything is scaled appropriately for that massive playthrough of 80 to 120 hours, and you can begin the game as a character from any of the existing FromSoft titles. This includes Bloodborne, with that character having the unique rally mechanic and quick movement. It doesn't matter if it would be weird, it's about being a fun love letter to Dark Souls. Maybe omit Sekiro as he may not fit in any manner, but give him a shout out with the weapons, or even a small hidden boss area or something neat. Basically, it could be a great way for the Elden Ring DLC team to use recycled assets in an updated engine to build an insanely cool send-off to the trilogy, while the other team keeps Armored Core 6 going. Fans would lose their minds with all the ways they could tackle Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 bosses with Dark Souls 3 gear or approaches. The initial playthrough would feel amazing. The New Game Plus, with people using insane weapons to go back through every game. It just seems like this would be a great way to fuel making money whilst giving fans something truly awesome. And to top it all off, do a competition for World's First No Hit, First No Death, and World's First No Hit, No Death, with either money prizes or being immortalized in the game as a weapon or boss or something. And he asked me, what are my thoughts on this? So, first of all, it's something that just generally would be amazing to think about, isn't it, really? I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like every fan's dream in a weird way of having this insane, massive Dark Souls experience, all the games combined together, going from one area to another, and it would be really cool. But I think, realistically, I don't think it'd be practical. I think the amount of new assets that they still have to create, there'd be a lot of work that would go into this. It wouldn't be something that like the Elden Ring DLC team would be able to make really after making the DLC or anything like that. And I also think, realistically, the amount of content there would probably be too much for one game. Now, I know you can look at things like the Halo Master Chief Collection, and yes, that is an example of something like this being done. But I feel like the Dark Souls games, I think there's a variety of reasons why this probably wouldn't realistically work. Number one, obviously there's always publishers that are going to get involved, and the publishers would probably want to sell 3 individual remakes, like a remake of 1, 2, and 3. But the thing is, FromSoftware themselves, even then, they don't really tend to look back. Hidetaka Miyazaki was always looking forward. He doesn't really want to look back, and Dark Souls 3 was more him sort of trying to course correct the series after Dark Souls 2 didn't get as much of a good reaction, and to probably try and please publishers as well. But Hidetaka Miyazaki doesn't really want to look back, and I think FromSoftware as a whole, they have such a reputation now of creating new things that people always seem to like. They've had hit after hit after hit now. I don't think they'd probably want to go back and do something like a remake, so it's much more likely that we'd get someone else like Bluepoint or another team to remake all of the games. And if they all did, and if a team like Bluepoint did come in, I think again it'd be more likely we'd get a remake of Dark Souls 1, then a couple of years, then a remake of 2, and then a remake of 3. But if they did, let's say they did, do something crazy, like a Master Chief style collection, but with all of the games in one. Even then, is that really what people would want? And I think, on one hand, yes, definitely. I think a lot of people would love this. It would be an insane experience going through all the games. But I think a part of me thinks it might take away something from each game. It might sort of take away the individuality and take away some of each game's distinct identity by unionizing the mechanics across all the games. And this is something that I saw with the Crash Bandicoot collection, because the Halo Master Chief collection, it actually does have a different engine for every single game. So therefore each game does still feel unique. But let's say that we are sort of combining them all into one, unionizing the mechanics across all the games and having it so you do play through 1, then at the end of Dark Souls 1 you transition seamlessly with your build into 2, and then transition seamlessly into your build in 3. I think the unionized mechanics across all the games would take away a lot of the distinct identity of each game. And the Crash Bandicoot Remake trilogy and the Spyro trilogy, well actually the Spyro trilogy to a lesser extent, the Crash Bandicoot Remake trilogy I think had this problem where in that game they took the movement mechanics that Crash Bandicoot has in the 3rd game and put those same movement mechanics in the previous games. This caused loads of issues in Crash Bandicoot 1, and that's the reason why that game has such a high difficulty. And it's really difficult, and it's way more difficult than if you go back and play the original Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation 1. That's because they unionized the mechanics across all the games, so therefore Crash's movement was the movement that he had in Crash Bandicoot 3, but they used the same gravity and movement mechanics in 1, which meant that you slipped off platforms and you didn't have the precise jumping that you needed in the original Crash Bandicoot 1 movement system, the movement mechanics of that game. That's sort of, yeah, it's a weird example, but in Dark Souls, I think if you took the movement mechanics from Dark Souls 3 and then gave you that in Dark Souls 1, even if you tuned the bosses so that the boss speeds were a little bit faster to sort of make you feel a little bit more in line with the Dark Souls 3 movement and the speed of combat in Dark Souls 3, then I think it's still, even if you sped the bosses up, it still wouldn't feel like the same game. And I think it would take away a lot of the identity, because then you'd have to sort of change the boss's moves, the bosses would be moving differently, the boss attacks would be at a different speed, and I think it would take things away from that game. Dark Souls 2 is similar, because Dark Souls 2 has such a distinct identity, and yes, I know that distinct identity a lot of people don't like. A lot of people don't like the movement mechanics and the combat pacing in Dark Souls 2, but then even if you unionize the mechanics to be sort of a medium pace, so maybe you slow down the Dark Souls 3 bosses just a little bit, only a tiny bit, and then you sped up the Dark Souls 1 and 2 bosses just a little bit so you sort of reached a middle ground, I think even then you would still encounter some issues, because then the Dark Souls 3 bosses, they wouldn't feel as fast, and that sort of style of combat that Dark Souls 3 is known for, being the fastest Dark Souls game, they wouldn't be as fast. And then the Dark Souls 1 bosses, they wouldn't be as slow, they'd be a little bit, and I don't know, I don't think it necessarily would work, and a part of me thinks that each one of the Dark Souls games has their own distinct personality, and I think I'd prefer a more faithful remake for each game, more in line with the Demon Souls remake. And whilst a lot of people did have criticisms of the artistic direction of the Demon Souls remake, I think no one can argue that it definitely was a faithful remake in terms of the gameplay mechanics. I think there's no argument really there. And I think myself personally, I would probably prefer that kind of remake of each of the games. However, for its own kind of experiment, like in an ideal world, I think I'd like to have both. I'd like to have a faithful remake of 1 and 2 and 3, where they just fix the little things here and there that need to be fixed to make the games better. And then also this kind of thing, because this kind of combining all 3 games into one seamless game, I think that would be its own awesome thing, and it still would be an amazing idea, and it still would be awesome to see it, but I think it's more its own kind of flavour, and it feels more like it would be a remix of the trilogy, almost like a little remix, so you sort of change the bosses a little bit here and there to fit with a unionized mechanic across all 3 games, and that would be a really cool experiment in its own way that I still would really love to see. But I think if you gave me the choice, would I prefer a faithful remake or this kind of unionized mechanic remake of the whole trilogy in one big package? I think I personally would prefer a faithful remake of each 3 games, like separately, or in one big Master Chief style collection. But I still think this was I mainly made this video because it's fun to theorize and think about all these different things that potentially we could be getting, or maybe we're not going to get any of them. Maybe FromSoftware is going to keep moving forward and no developer is going to come in and remake the trilogy, because maybe they don't need to, you know? The games are amazing as they are, and if a remake came along, it's just going to be a visual overhaul, isn't it, really? And we can get that from mods anyway. So, anyway, what do you think about a Dark Souls Trilogy remake? I've done a video talking about a remake before, but this is more about this specific kind of theoretical possibility of what we could get. What would you like to see if there was a remake of the trilogy? Forget about whether you would like to see one or not, but if they did come out with a remake, regardless of whether you want it or not, what would you like it to be if you actually had a chance to play it and it did happen? Let me know that down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it or feel it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is Soul Reborn, signing out. Have a good one.